All right, thanks everyone for joining us this evening. The Hipp Lecture Series on International Affairs and National Security has hosted some of the most distinguished speakers that Wofford College has had the fortune of bringing to its campus. The lecture series is a generous gift and labor of one of our college's most accomplished alumni, Van Hipp. Van graduated from Wofford in 1982. He went on to serve as the chair of the South Carolina Republican Party. In 1990, he was sworn in as Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for the Reserve Forces and later served as Principal Deputy General Counsel of the Navy. Today, besides his work in defense contracting, he's a recognized expert on national security, regularly appearing on Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, and CBS Evening News. We are glad to have his support for our college. Van has generously agreed to introduce our speaker for this evening, so without further ado, please welcome Van Hipp back to Wofford College.
Thanks, Professor Alvis. I want to thank Brent Williamson, our Associate Athletic Director, for giving me the parking tickets for the Sanford football game on Saturday. I'll be there in Birmingham, but it's a great privilege to be back home here in Spartanburg and here at Wofford College. And let me just say, you're in for a real treat tonight. Mike Rogers is one of the most respected Americans today in the field of national security, but he's got something in common with the folks here at Wofford. He's a graduate of Adrian College, and many of you may not have heard of Adrian College, but it is a small liberal arts Methodist college in Michigan, and the colors are gold and black. So he's got something in common with us. Now, they're not the Terriers or the Bulldogs, but we can forgive you for that. But tonight, Mike Rogers is going to be the Terrier. Mike Rogers has been an American soldier. He served as an officer in the United States Army. He's been a special agent with the FBI, a 7-term member of the United States Congress, where he actually chaired the House Intelligence Committee. And I was speaking with a friend of mine in D.C. the other day and told him that he was coming here to Wofford. And he said, you know, Mike Rogers, that was the last chairman of the House Intelligence Committee this country had who was respected on both sides of the aisle. And that's what America needs again today. He's also the chairman of the board of MITRE. With over 8,000 employees, close to $2 billion in annual revenue. They oversee many of the federally research development centers across the country, focused on the things that we need to keep this country safe, like 5G, the quantum race against China, cyber warfare, developing the workforce that we need for the future. He's also the David Abshire Chair at the Center for the Study of the American Presidency and the U.S. Congress. As chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, he oversaw a budget of $70 billion across all of this nation's 17 intelligence agencies. I could go on and on. Told someone tonight I was driving here from Charlotte when I flew in, and I was listening to WBT, the big talk radio station in Charlotte, and they had Mike Rogers on the radio for 30 minutes. And just listening to this man that you're about to hear, I don't believe there's anyone in this country with the depth and understanding that he has of the complexity of the national security challenges facing this country. We've got China, we've got Russia, we've got the quantum race against China, we've got what's going on in Ukraine, we've got Kim Jong-un being himself once again firing missiles over Japan, on and on. We've got a problem here in this country where we, education is a national security issue. Are we learning the right kinds of things in our schools so that our young people can compete on the world stage? It's an international chess game. And this is a man who understands that and understands what we as Americans need to do. Mike Rogers is an American patriot who has spent his life and devoted his life to keeping America strong and safe. Please join me in giving a strong South Carolina welcome to Mike Rogers.
My God, will you go over there? Gosh, I really don't want to say anything and screw up what you're thinking right now. Holy mackerel, that was fantastic, man. I appreciate that. Would you travel with me everywhere to do that? By the way, my mother wrote that introduction, so thanks for delivering that. I appreciate it. First of all, thank you very much for taking some time on a school night to be out. I appreciate it very much. I have to tell you, my father was a shop teacher who went on to be a vice principal of the school. Pretty tough guy, football coach, had 5 boys in our family. So, he knew how to keep a strong hand to keep 5 rambunctious boys growing up. It was always kind of one of those deals where he would say, I'm very proud of my boys. I had 5 boys. I had 4 that turned out really good, and I had 1 politician in the family. So I told Van I got out of politics a few years back just to make sure I could go back to Thanksgiving dinner. I thought that was kind of a nice treat for me to go do. Listen, I was in the FBI, by the way, and I see a lot of students here, and I'm sure this is a little bit of forced family fun for you, right? This is like, I know I have to go. I got to take notes. I got to go back to the professor, right? A little bit of that. We know that's going on. Come on, you can't fool me. So it reminded me, as a young FBI agent, I did this. I had this case. And I worked organized crime and public corruption in the city of Chicago. And candidly, and I don't want to say this too loud, but if they'd have told me I had to do it for free or pay them, I probably would have done it. Most fantastic education and experience of my life, working the streets of Chicago, chasing gangsters like No Nose DeFranzo and Johnny Apes and Tony Big Tuna Ayupa. I used to love their names, fantastic names. It was great. So I go one day, and Johnny Apes was one of the crew bosses, and I'm a young agent, and I think everyone should want to talk to me, right? I'm dashing. Who wouldn't want to cooperate with me, including an old-time Sicilian gangster from Chicago who's about 70 years old. I think I was 26 or something. So I go and hit him up, and what was happening, and he got his nickname Apes because he would go out and beat members of his crew when he'd get mad. Like just stand up in a meeting and beat them, half to death practically. So I had heard about one of these beatings that happened on one of his Sunday meetings. And so I decided, what the heck? So I go and I happen to see him on the street. I go up to him and I say, Johnny Apes, the morale of your crew is not likely to improve when you're beating them half to death. Maybe why don't you come downtown? We'll have a cup of coffee. We'll talk about some things. Who wouldn't want to talk to me again, right? And so he's thinking about it, and he says, let me tell you something. Nothing like a good beating to keep the family together, right? So I'm thinking, this feels a little bit like that now, doesn't it, right there for the students? Oh, come on, students, lighten up. You could be at your dorm room having fun, playing games. Come on. No? You're not with me? All right, hang in there. You'll get there. So when we look at my run for Congress, I decided to move on from the FBI. Won the closest race in the country in the year 2000, 111 votes. Don't recommend it. And after about 9 months, my whole congressional career and the kinds of things I talked about running and wanting to do and get done, and I was a passionate believer that people can make a difference if you're willing to stand up for your principles and work with others to try to get something done. And after about 9 months, 9/11 happens, right? So I'm still learning how to be a congressman. When we're getting the evacuation orders from our office buildings because nobody's quite sure what's happening, but we're very clear that our nation was under attack. And so when you looked at all of that, I thought, where can I best serve with my military training and my FBI training and experience? And I certainly thought in the national security space I could probably be used, and went off to serve on the House Intelligence Committee shortly thereafter. And if you think about how important America is, I got the chance to travel all over the world, mostly to bad places, mostly where bad things were happening. But the national security apparatus of America was forward at the pointy end of the spear, trying to do good work, bring enough either intelligence or justice to people who needed to be removed from the battlefield so that we could finally kind of get our status quo of safety back to where it was prior to 9/11. It takes a lot of work, a lot of effort, some brilliant patriots all over the world, many who you'll never get to hear about because they were working in ultimate secrecy. And during all of those visits, something dawned on me. I had befriended a small Middle Eastern country's intelligence chief, and I would go back frequently. and have conversations about the way forward and the kinds of things we could do to work together to stop extremism at that time, and how you stop organizations like Hezbollah from gaining strength and taking advantage of a world that was in a little bit uneven on their legs, for sure. And it struck me one day when we were coming back, we had a particular kind of at odds election, if you will, back in the United States. And by the way, what all that travel taught me is how much the world pays attention to who we are and what we're doing. More than you think. They knew more about elections and outcomes and issues sometimes than my constituents I served back home. And they would talk to you about it when you were overseas in places you just wouldn't imagine. What is the intelligence chief in Afghanistan talking to me about local economic development issues back in Michigan? And you think, man, this is really interesting. You got your hands full here, sir. Why are you worried about the United States and what's going on? And this particular Middle East intelligence official stopped me one day. The meeting was done. We're walking out, and he grabs my collar and says, "Hey, sir, can I talk to you?" He says, "Would you go home? Do you talk to people? You talk to your constituents? You communicate to them what's going on in the world?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely. Try to anyway." And he said, "Do me a favor. Tell your fellow Americans not to give up on themselves." And this was a reoccurring theme, place after place after place. They saw America and knew something wasn't right. We were at each other's throats in ways I had never seen in my political career or even before my political career. And the rest of the world took note. They were basically saying, listen, if you remove yourself, and this is what this gentleman told me, you guys remove yourself from engagement in the world. Who cares about a small country like us? The only people that want to be here is China and Russia and Iran. None of them have our interests or even interested in having our own interests in what happens in our country. And that becomes a dumpster fire. A fire we would have to deal with as Americans at some other time in our history, and our young students might have to deal with in their professional careers. When you think about where we are today, and we get to travel a lot. I've been all over the country. We just finished a tour back through North Carolina, all the way down through South Carolina. We're here at Wofford, and I can't thank Van enough, who's, by the way, is more humble than he deserves to be, had such a tremendous impact on our national security, and is well regarded in Washington, D.C. today in national security circles like I've never seen before. So if you ever get a chance to pull on his shirt sleeve and ask him some questions, I highly recommend that you do that. And thanks for being a part of this great institution as well. Fantastic. So what do I see when I'm out there? I see people who are politically discouraged. They're exhausted. They're looking at what happens to the United States, and everybody knows it, but nobody says it. Our politics are getting pretty small. And the world is taking note. The world decides that when we're acting small and we are being, according to the Chinese words, self-absorbed, that there's other things that they can do in the world that's probably not the best interest of national security or economic prosperity for the United States of America. When I think about the chunk of Americans who are on one side and the chunk of Americans who are on the other side of the political equation, we've gotten to a point where, at least when I first started politics, you could say, hey, let's go out and, we disagree, but let's go out and see if we can have a beer and talk about it. So I really can't hang out with you because you're of that other ilk or party. To now, if you don't agree with me 100%, you are evil, you are wrong, and you are trying to destroy the United States of America. Pretty hard to find dialogue in that equation. When you look at the fact that anger, right? And so if you think about the people in the middle, what happens to the people in the middle? We've talked to a lot of them. They're the ones that are saying, hey, we're politically discouraged. We're kind of exhausted. I'm not sure it makes a difference anymore. That's a dangerous note in the history of the United States for this many folks to be in that mindset. If you think about the fact that, okay, we have angry, and now we have apathetic. We don't need angry and apathetic in the next go-round of American political discourse. We need action. I'm going to tell you about that why that's so important, and why at some point we have to set aside our hardest differences to understand that we have a major national security threat staring us in the face, and we don't necessarily understand it, and it's eroding our ability to compete. And when I look at the young students in here, it will erode your economic prosperity and opportunity in the future if we don't set the course right. And you should not underestimate the ability for our adversaries to do the kinds of things that they're doing to us today. You take a country like China, and by the way, Russia's involved in this, Iran is involved in this. They tried to set up a separate currency basket a while back that I think they're still committed to doing, which would mean the US currency isn't the dominant currency, which means we have a lot less options when we go forward on the international stage. And by the way, it means you have a lot less choices here at home. Imagine under their totalitarian or autocratic rule that they set trade policy, who you can and who can't trade with, what portions of the ocean we can transport our goods. Imagine that their currency, the dollar, which today is so powerful because it's always good. Everybody goes to the United States dollar because they know it's always good. It will be good currency because we behave like a country that says we will be stable and consistent and strong. And by the way, our economy is free. And if you come here, your money's good. What if they get to take that away from us? They get to set the rules for what technology looks like and how it's interoperable around the world. They get to control the banking systems, the international trade and finance of the world, because they get to set the rules. This is the thing, these are the things that they tell you they are going to do. Not that they're going to ask, not that they're going to kind of get there, not that they're going to see if we give them permission to do it. They tell you they're going to do it. If you think about choice here at home, imagine you don't get a choice for what your laptop is anymore. Imagine that the Chinese Communist Party gets to dictate what the standards of your next TV or even your boots, because they can turn things on and off. They're not happy with the United States. They control this much influence in the world the way the United States does. They can turn things on and off. So they're looking to do a couple of things. And they, again, these are the words of the Chinese. You could go back and read the English translations of senior officials in China and Russia before Ukraine. And their effort is to disrupt our economic, both stability and prowess, disrupt our ability to conduct national security in the way we do today. And they want to sow, this is important, sow division in the United States of America. We saw this in the 2016 elections when the Russians decided that they were going to get Americans mad at Americans. And they have done this for 70 years, by the way. This isn't new. But what was new is that they could be in Moscow and be on your laptop right here. And they could be on your smartphone driving up the road going to see grandma in a way they could never do before. So they took all that knowledge of information operation warfare and applied it and to see if they could get Americans hating Americans. They even went as far as to go to black activist groups, try to get them worked up, and white nationalist groups and try to get them worked up. Then they tried to drive them to the same locations. And why? Because they wanted chaos. They wanted footage. They wanted hatred on TV. Because what they've been doing, if you see RT television around the world, I've seen it, is talk about how dysfunctional American politics are and how Americans hate Americans. They can't be a great leader. They can't be stable. They can't be trusted if they can't get along with their neighbors. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the national security threat. This is huge and it's big and it's only going to get bigger. You have North Korea, right? They see what happens when you have nuclear weapons and your fighting isn't going so well. What happens? Putin says he's going to use nuclear weapons. Why do you think North Korea is pursuing nuclear weapons with a passion? They also have huge missile programs, chemical and cyber programs. Iran is pursuing a nuke. Many would argue about how many days it takes for them to get there. They are a danger to the region. They've already showed that they'll use proxy fighting in the region to cause disruption. They also want that nuclear bomb so that they can do the same thing Putin does. If things don't go well, I always got that. Russia goes without saying. I mean, we could talk infinitum about them, their threats, what's happening on the battlefield. And as I talked to a senior military officer recently, and he said, always remember, don't gauge Russia's performance today what the battle might look like a year from now or 2 years from now. Meaning, don't let our guard down. But it's going badly, and what he's doing for the first time, it's been 70 years since we even had to talk about a weapon that split atoms. We're talking about him today. We'll talk about China for a minute. Every 10 hours, they open up a counter-espionage case in the United States of America on Chinese espionage. Every 10 hours. They conduct economic espionage. We think it's the largest transfer of intellectual property wealth the world has ever seen, and they stole every bit of it. They had said about 20 years ago that they were going to build a Navy to compete with the US Navy in a blue water environment, meaning worldwide. Their Navy just surpassed the size of the United States Navy last year. They developed weapons systems to counter the strength of some of our naval weapons systems about 2 years ago and put them into operation. They've done this global influence campaign, really important. So it's called the Belt and Road Initiative. Some of you may have heard about this. So they're going around offering huge loans to build ports and railway systems, to get into the mining operations of certain countries for critical minerals that they feel they need to win any future strategic competition. And what they've been doing is, by the way, they make these provisions, this poor country can't afford it. What they do is go in and say, guess what, you don't have to pay us back, we'll just take ownership of the port. I'd like to say this might happen, it's actually happening. They do, and say they want to be data dominant by 2025. I want to tell you why this is important. Most of this is through their AI algorithms. They have actually got, the reason people use hearsay, oh my gosh, they're winning on the AI debate. It's not because their algorithms are any better or any smarter than AI algorithms. It's because they have a data set that is so massive, we could never run our algorithms over something so big. And if you're the bigger you are, for those of you in the data space, the bigger the data set, the smarter your AI is going to get. How many of you, by the way, have done a 23andMe test? Oh, come on, be honest. Yep, there's some hands going up there. TikTok, come on. You know you're there. Can't get my daughter off it. Nobody? Really? Okay. I know who you are, as a former FBI guy. I have a list out back. Check in with me before you leave. I'm kidding. Why is that important? Every time you're on, you log in, you engage in activities on something like TikTok, that data goes into a profile. It goes into their big data point base in Beijing. Same with 23andMe. They use all of that DNA information to create huge databases on Americans, on Westerners, on other folks. I don't know about the rest of you. I'm not really comfortable knowing that China is collecting about 1,000 points of data on their own citizens that they put in these databases, let alone starting these huge databases on Americans and Westerners all over the world. Why? Who cares? Well, here's what they did with it at home. They created a social credit scoring system, and the Chinese Communist Party of China says that if you score a certain point on their AI algorithms that are running on the score of your data, meaning, are you on social media and saying something bad about the Communist Party? Are you saying something good about capitalism and maybe the United States influence and trying to avert conflict and allow prosperity to grow in the world? You're saying those kind of things, you're just not a good Chinese citizen. Who cares? Last year, millions of people were not permitted to travel to see their family. We're not allowed to buy plane tickets or train tickets. I'm talking domestically in China. I would like to tell you this is 10 years from now, we're predicting it's going to happen. It's been happening for about 3 years. I don't know about you, I'm uncomfortable with the Chinese Communist Party owning the data of the world by 2025. I think we have to ask ourselves something that's really important. And again, they told us they want to supplant our leadership off the world stage. They say they're kind of tired of US leadership. And in the past, they've been working with, good intentioned countries like Russia, Iran, and North Korea to try to figure out a way to supplant the US from its influence around the world. And I have to ask ourselves, are we configured correctly? Are we aligned with all our interests, the way the government operates, with observing the threats that are getting ready to come at us from China? Are we arranged correctly to compete in a way the United States has done so many times in our history? I mean, you have to look at economically. Are we ready? Militarily, are we ready? Diplomatically. You know, I had my football coach when I was in high school, always used to say right before we go on the game, he said, there's no magic to this, but you have to have your head and your heart in the game if you're going to win. You have to ask yourselves, is our head and our heart in the game? They just did something pretty amazing in education, the Chinese. They created something, I just announced it recently, the Socialist Modernization Plan for World Leadership by 2050. They want to be able to control all the development, innovation, and use of technology that's developed by 2050. So you think about what technology has done for the United States. It's done for our economy, what it's done for all of us, what it's done for our, the ability for us to communicate, to learn, to develop new and innovative solutions to real-world problems. They're basically saying, not so much, not after 2050. And here's what they're doing. Last year, it was about the first year, they doubled the number of STEM PhDs, science, technology, engineering, and math in the United States. Next year, they'll double it. Next year, they'll double it. For you math majors in here, you know how you can draw that graph. It doesn't look very good. If you're trying to get to 2050 and be technology dominant, and you're putting out all these scientists who are going to be doing their work for their way and their definition of technology. In their primary and secondary schools, think about this. Their primary and secondary schools, they're teaching AI, big data analytics, primary schools, mind you, quantum, and biotech. They're teaching quantum mechanics by the 8th grade. So you have to ask yourself, all right, are we aligned? Or do we need to realign? So I'm going to tell you this. This is one of my biggest fears. Somebody asked me today, what are you most worried about in the challenge of the United States for the next decade? We have a literacy crisis in America. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to acknowledge it. Nobody wants to admit it's there. Let me give you some numbers. 70% of our nation's children in school today are not reading at grade level, 70. Which means by the 8th grade, when they're teaching quantum mechanics, over 70% of our children can't read at the 8th grade level. In a recent study, half of graduating students could not name 3 branches of the US government. Over 50% of US adults today, can't read past the 6th grade level. If you think about the challenge that presents to where China wants to set up to go and where we are in the country, we have a realignment problem. Now, here's the good news. We can solve it. We'll talk about that in a second. But we are going to have to start acknowledging it and understand that we have to come together as a nation to solve these big problems because China is moving out to beat us. We have a spending problem. Interest on the debt in 2021, $562 billion, the interest payment on the debt. Department of Defense that year was about $700 billion. So think of the challenges we have, think of the debt we've incurred, and think of that interest payment. Got bad news for you. That was when the Fed was loaning money at about 0.25%. It's going to be about 3% here pretty soon. What do you think happens to that interest payment? It will be likely larger than our Department of Defense spending. And remember, an interest payment doesn't get you anything. Doesn't get you an FBI agent, doesn't get you a soldier, doesn't get a Medicare payment, a Social Security, it gets you nothing other than paying interest on money that was spent before. Money, by the way, you students are going to inherit and try to have to figure out how you catch us up. Crazy is that, I mean, that DC money machine has been cranking, right? It's been raining cash, and we all felt pretty good about it until the bill came due. And I'm telling you, the bill is coming due. The World Bank said that they normally will take a country that is and say that you're in financial trouble and put you on the list when your debt to GDP ratio is 77%. The United States just passed 120%. The median tax payment, think about our government. Are we configured correctly? Are we ready for this fight? Are we lean? Are we mean? Are we doing things the right way? The median tax payment, median means a lot of people paid more, some paid less, but it's about $15,000, the median tax payment. For the first time in DC, one federal employee went over $120,000 a year. One. So look around you, pick out eight of your closest friends, and ask yourselves, are we configured correctly to take 8 of our 100% tax bill to pay for one federal employee? Is this sustainable? Is that the way we beat the kind of the strategic threat that's coming at us? I guarantee you it is not. I mean, you think about the people in your family who are ponying up to the bar to pay their taxes only to cover the cost of one federal employee. We have 2 million federal employees. Maybe we don't need 2 million. Maybe we need 1.5 million. It's the last big institution that has never been modernized. I mean, think about this. You can be on an airplane, you're flying from here, you're going to San Francisco. You get on there and you buy yourself some shoes. You have them sent back to your house here. By the time you land, you get on, they can tell you exactly where that purchase order is, right? Exactly. You can tell it's out for delivery. You're going to be there in a few hours. If you, by the way, Walmart in Arkansas can tell you when a roll of toilet paper leaves the store anywhere in the country within minutes. Because it's automatic, it's all automatic, it's all tracked, it's all aligned, right? The logistical supply chain coordinates all of that for instantaneous notice. And why do they do that? For ordering and keeping stock and all of those good things, right? It's a great idea. Here's what happens with the federal government just in the last few years. The Paycheck Protection Act lost $80 billion because they didn't know where the money went. The COVID Unemployment Relief Fund, according to NBC News, was as much as $400 billion lost to either fraud or bureaucratic snafu. The COVID Disaster Relief Fund, $163 billion lost. The Pentagon came out and said, oops, we lost $25 billion a year in bureaucratic inefficiencies. They didn't really define that. That's $125 billion in the last 5 years. Billion dollars. That's almost $750 billion gone, wasted. The Chinese have just built more ships than our US Navy. Should we waste $1? Should we have one more federal employee than we absolutely need? How about a little technology? How about learning about barcodes? The US military lost billions and billions of dollars of equipment because they couldn't account for it. This is outside of the $25 billion snafu. I have to tell you, I've been in the tech business for the last 8 years. Quantum computing, cybersecurity, logistics and moving logistics companies. With MITRE, we do everything from nuclear command and control to cyber to everything in between. No business could put up with this. They wouldn't be in business. And we apply technology not to punish people, but to make people more efficient. So you deliver a product and a service in a time that's timely. Do we really need to hire 87,000 IRS agents? Or maybe we need a tax code that's a lot easier to follow. Think of the cost of that. That's going to be $80 billion. So the solution is, I'm not sure we're getting our fair share. We're going to hire more people in the federal government, drive up the bill so that we're after Americans. When we have the Chinese and the Russians and the North Koreans and the Iranians knocking on our door to do bad things. We'll talk about carbon for just a second. Do we have time here? This is another place we're not aligned. So the Chinese have been very busy about going around the world and locking down critical minerals and rare earth materials. So you think, okay, when I graduate, I'm going to have a big job. I'm going to go out and buy a very expensive electric car. Great, good for you, good. Here's the problem. 85% of that car is processed in China. 85%. We have a mine in the United States that's been trying to get into critical minerals for 23 years. They can't get through the 65 different permit processes. Do you think China has that problem? By the way, they have one permit process, and you think, well, that's the Communist Party of China. We don't want to be like them. You're right. How about Germany? They have one permit process. If we're serious about competing with folks we know want to take our legs out from under us, we have to align all of our policies. We can't have one that sounds great and not do the hard work and clear out the underbrush to make it possible. Well, guess what we're doing? We're doing ones that sound great, and we're not clearing the underbrush to make it possible. Guess what? We come in second. And when you come in second, China is never going to let their foot off our throat. This is not a race. We can come in second. Think about politics, to me, is the last kind of big one. Well, let me tell you a story quickly, by the way, why you don't want to rely on the Chinese supply chain portion. And I'm not saying I don't want them to be great participants in great commerce around the world. I'm a free market guy. That'd be great. If you're operating fairly, if you're operating by the laws, if you operate and respect intellectual property, come on in. Water's fine. They're not doing any of those things. Here's what they did on an American company producing PPE, personal protection equipment, right at the beginning of COVID, right? Everybody's a little terrified. Everyone gets sent home. Nobody knows what they're doing. Run on toilet paper, right? Couldn't find any of it. So we had a company said, no worries, we're going to produce a lot of PPE. We're going to get it back. We're going to have this equipment around and available. The Chinese military showed up on their door, said, thanks for playing. You're out. That's ours. They confiscated it. They took it. And the crazy part of that is they were using some of these PPE shipments as health diplomacy. They were sending them to other nations saying, courtesy of the Chinese government. Now, if you can't count on a friend when you need it most, likely not a friend. And if you can't count on them when things are going bad, maybe we ought not to shift our reliance on rare earths and critical minerals to a place we know has the ability to turn it off, and we watch them do it. Not a lot of common sense here to me. I'm going to talk about politics quickly. If I can, this is the other thing that if we don't fix, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. I mean, it's been a little bit exasperating when you look at it, in my mind. Our politics has gotten really small. We find the craziest ways to hate each other in the United States these days. And I'm not talking about disagreeing or liking a policy or not liking a policy. I am talking about the pure hatred that you see on TV every single night. So how much time do we spend in this country, candidly, over the last 5 years, 10 years? Telling each other how we're different. Our race is different, our gender is different, our religions are different, our zip codes are different. You came from this place, I came from that place. Matter of fact, we have whole forms now you got to fill out and tell you how different you are from everyone else that's sitting around you. When was the last time you ever took a note and said how we're the same? How we are one team? I always looked at it this way. You know, if you're a football team, and you decided to say, okay, we gotta start separating ourselves the way the rest of America is starting to separate ourselves. So the offensive linemen shouldn't really be talking to the running backs because they're different. The wide receiver should not be talking to the quarterback because they're very, very different. Different missions, they do different things. They look different, they're built different. You would have no team in a hurry. Think about that. It'd be completely dysfunctional. But think about where we are in the body politics of today. You know, Van was reminding me earlier before this that Ronald Reagan had a great saying. He said, hey, man, if I can get somebody to agree with me 85%, that person's my friend. You think about today. Could you really have that conversation? Not likely. Meanwhile, they're teaching quantum mechanics in the 8th grade in China to come after us by 2050. You know, the interesting thing about the American dream and why it's so important, I gotta give you a hint why the rest of the world sees us and is a little nervous. And I've had many, many leaders tell me just in the last few years, please get your act together. You're scaring the hell out of the rest of the world. Without you, this place, the whole world is on fire. You're the only consistent and beacon of hope the world has left. Don't give up on yourselves. And if you think about what the American dream is here, it doesn't mean you get a fancy car. It doesn't mean you make $1 million. It really means you can be your own person and do your own good in your own way. Whatever that is, it's still possible here. If you go to leadamerica.org, you can see some personal stories of people who came humble beginnings and made it, not 100 years ago. This is recently. because they had the tenacity to work hard and put their nose down and know that it was on them. It was their personal sweat, their equity, their hard work that was going to get them ahead, which was the very foundation of who we are in America. It's the very foundation of who we are. When I was just talking to somebody the other day, and sometimes we forget. Uber drivers are the best source of information ever, by the way. Somebody should make a movie and just follow them around every day, get a new one, tell them their story. Fantastic. And a guy this the other day who earned his career. He came from Lebanon. He actually went to Somalia, long story, became a Somali citizen, then decided to come to the United States. And he got here and he said, I just didn't have a lot of skills. My English wasn't great. He said, but I found a guy was giving me a chance to drive a concrete truck on the East Coast. And he said, I worked there for 26 years. And I knew that if I could, over that time, learn English and better my skills, I could continue to work up in this particular company. He didn't own it, he didn't do anything. But at the end of 26 years, he said, I was making a great living. I loved it. And he said, I just finished sending my 2 kids to college. Me. The guy from Lebanon who went to Somalia, who came to the United States and had nothing. And I'll tell you, if you get in an Uber car, you'll hear some of the most passionate, inspirational stories you'll ever want to hear about people who are trying to better their lives or their families' lives. He was being his own person, doing his own good in his own way. That is the American dream. And somehow in our political discourse, we have forgotten that. You know what we need in that football team that I was telling you about? We need a team meeting. We got to get everybody in the same room. And listen, I'm not saying give up on your principles or your philosophies. I am telling you that we have to have a conversation about what our real threat is to the economic prosperity and the freedom and security we enjoy here at home. We're not having that conversation. And I get it. Inflation is bad. We should talk about it. I mean, I get it. The borders are out of control and uncontrollable. We got to talk about it. But talking about it and being angry about it or being apathetic about it is not action to fix it. When I hear people in America who have done well tell me, oh my gosh, we're about ready to give up on this thing. Are you kidding me? I know you students aren't ready to give up. You're just getting started. It doesn't mean you have to work at it. America is something that you got to be a part of. You have to work with. You have to promote it. And I know you're thinking, God, that sounds pretty awful, and that sounds bad, and maybe we should give up, or at least go to the bar. But you think about the 60s. Imagine the people who were just where you were or trying to fight through the 60s with all that confusion. There was an assassination of a US president, assassination of a presidential candidate, an assassination of a prominent civil rights leader, riots in cities, the Vietnam War, which was horribly unpopular. People back then were thinking, man, maybe we're done. Maybe it's over. But you know what? There was a whole group of Americans said, nope, not going to make it happen. I mean, we are going to make it happen. We're going to get this done. We're going to stand on our feet. And we understand with those core beliefs of a strong national security, a passionate interest in free markets, and to not lose the belief that this is still the land of opportunity. I hope you take this as something we ought to be paying attention to and not something that should make us crawl under bed and pull the sheets over your head. It is a challenge. We have solutions, but we have to start talking to each other in a way that understands we want to go here, and we will not let our foreign adversaries take our legs out from under us as long as we core believe that this still is the most amazing country. It's a pretty good planet too, by the way, on the face of the earth. So thanks for giving me a few minutes. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me tonight.
Yeah. We've got some questions from the students.
Okay.
So we're going to move the podium here, and we've got some questions. They came up with last week in the classes, but before we get going, I do want to say that I like what you said about learning from the Uber driver. I'm reminded of the old saying, too bad all the people who really know how to run this country are too busy driving cabs and cutting hair.
We should elect them to office.
I feel it. But here's the first question from one of the students. How does partisan polarization affect Congress's work on national security and intelligence?
Listen, we've learned that we can get through this. When I was chairman, I saddled up to my Republican, a Democrat colleague, a guy named Dutch Ruppersberger, a fine American, doing great things, sat down, worked with us in a very bipartisan way. And we decided if we could work together, and the reason, by the way, we didn't have a budget for the intelligence community, $70+ billion, is because they were fighting over the dumbest things. Honestly, I wish I were kidding. And so every year they get hung up on, I don't care if they were in charge or we were in charge, we'd put out this really stupid thing. They call them poison pill amendments. And everything just kind of seized to a halt, which meant they were just pouring money at the intelligence community with no real oversight, which I thought was disastrous. So we sat down and we said, we can do this. Let's work this through. Candidly, we got a budget every single year. We even agreed that we found about $6 billion of waste we were able to cut out of there, and we agreed on it. Now listen, we didn't agree on everything. It's okay. But we sat down and understood that national security was most important than any political shot scoring, and the nation needed it. And it was that important for the nation to do it. And so I believe you can do it. I do believe it has dragged us down a bit. Now the good news is the budget did get passed, and it was pretty bipartisan, big numbers. That's good. So people still understand the value of it, but it takes us too long. There's always these continuing resolutions. That harms our national security because all of the folks that sell parts or sell medical supplies or whatever have to stop, right? So our military keeps calling up going, any minute now, please, any minute now. This is a horrible way to run a railroad. So I argue it's probably as close to a bipartisan issue as you can get. We still have to get that last 20 yards to make sure that people understand the value and importance of putting some certainty into these budgets. And of course, again, I think the biggest threat to our national security budget is our debt and our spending. It's gonna hurt us.
There's another question from a Wofford student. How would you describe the differences between your chairmanship of the House Intelligence Committee and that of the current chairman, Adam Schiff?
Boy, look at the time. Isn't it late? Listen, I think I just told you my philosophy, and I won't say anything particular about a sitting member of Congress other than, listen, if you want to make that job political, it's the best job in the world because I can come out of classified space and say, that person's bad because I saw it in there, but you can't see it. That person's bad. That's bad. But I'm sorry, I can't talk about it. It is, you only need serious adults serving on the Intelligence Committee. You see, there was a point where we were kind of that third eyes of covert action programs, so Dutch and I would have to sit down and take a look at things and go, okay, or no. It's serious work, and it's important work, and getting that information out to the public is dangerous to people who are doing great things to protect the country. You got to have serious people doing that, and if you use that as a way to get on TV by saying something bad, it's wrong. I used to tell my members, if I see you on TV the first couple of years, you won't be a member here anymore. It takes a while to even understand what you can say and what you can't say about it. And now I'm not talking about 30,000 foot giving you the geopolitical situation. That's different. But if you're out talking about programs and other things, it's dangerous. And so I think, let's just say the way we found it is the way it has been since we left. How's that?
Another question. What do you think of the criticism of the FBI over the last few years? And does the FBI deserve any of the criticism it has received, or is the criticism unwarranted?
So you have to remember two things. So when you do those kind of high-level, I'll call them political investigations for the lack of a better term right now, but there's a whole nother FBI, right? So about a year ago, we lost 2 FBI agents killed serving a warrant on somebody who was engaged in child pornography, the sale and distribution, right? So promoting a pretty horrific crime against children. And they were killed. They went up to do the warrant, they got shot, awful, right? So their families are paying a price forever. That's real FBI work. That's what you train to do. That's what you go and do. I worked organized crime, chased gangsters, people who were running houses of prostitution, all of those things, drugs, racketeering. That's real work. That's crime. That's where you want the FBI. When you start dipping your toe into these decisions and you start to put your finger on the scale saying, let's err on the side of, that's a serious, serious mistake. This has not been a long-term problem for the Bureau. I think there's some cultural decision-making on the 7th floor of the FBI headquarters that they need to kind of shake themselves out of. I do believe that some decision-making matrix there is not right, and they just need to fix it. And somebody needs to fix it. I'd be happy to go fix it for them.
For students interested in working in national security, what do you think will be some of the best opportunities in the next 3 to 4 years? Cyber, and did I mention cyber? We have a huge need of people who understand and are capable of understanding what the cyber threat is and how it's coming, and it's evolving. I've never seen such a fast evolving security threat than I have in cyber. Putin a few years ago said the next war will be one on data, and he's also talking about cyber, meaning weapon systems that operate remotely with AI weapon system controls. That's what he was talking about. Thankfully, they don't have those on the battlefield today, but they knew it, and they knew that they were going to try to get there. The Chinese are already trying to get there. I don't know if you saw in the paper today or in the news where Putin came out and talked about a underwater nuclear torpedo. Did you see this? He said it, well, they leaked it. I ain't buying the leak part. I think they wanted to see it. And what they would do is take out whole ports with these nuclear torpedoes. And so if you think the data that's running on that, and it's a remote thing, so it's not manned, the data and the cybersecurity environment around it is going to be really critical for the next generation national security people to understand. It's 5G, and it's all this kind of layered of technology. So I would say that language is still really important. And for those of you who have soft skills, you're not cyber people. By the way, I went to a liberal arts school. I'm now talking about quantum computing around the country. Never stop learning. Never stop being curious. You never know what you're going to do in 20 years. Did I say 20? Okay, okay, maybe a little longer than that. But I would look at all of those, at least understanding the science of it. So I would argue, I'm sure you have some kind of cyber coursework here. Take a 101. You don't have to have, 7,000 or whatever they have, but you should have a 101. So that when you go to an assignment, let's say you want to be a diplomat, you want to be a CIA officer, an FBI agent, you should at least understand what the threats are from cyber and at least understand the mechanics of it. And trust me, if I can go through this, you can do it. And you need to have that understanding as a base to go in whatever you're doing. But I would say language. And the other part is listen, the international relations piece of this is going to be really important. The dynamics of which you're going to have to participate in a new and changing world. I think it's going to be more bipolar. I think China is going to have client states, including Russia. It's going to fundamentally change the way we have to deal with the world and engage in the world. And I think any understanding and study of that is going to be really important. Right. The last question, what are the biggest threats posed by China today to our national security?
So honestly, they have, it really is their cyber capability. I sound like a broken record here. Their military is growing, it's getting bigger. They've deployed troops. Remember when they said that they would never deploy troops out of their defensive region? They did. Again, they think they're feeling their oats. They're thinking they're going to be pretty strong. So their missile system's really good. They've attacked us in space, right? Space used to be an uncontested domain for the United States, no more. You know why we have a space force? Is because now it's a combatant zone, space, right? So now that's a whole new thing we're trying to go through and working through in the last couple of years because they figured out a way to go after our strengths. Space was a strength, they went after it. Our Navy was a strength, they went after it, right? So they're very clear and purposeful about where they're going. And they enable all of that with cyber theft. So they steal intellectual property. Matter of fact, some of their weapon systems, if you look at it, you would have thought it was built in, right down the road here. In South Carolina. I mean, they stole it, they repurposed it, they built it, and they put it out to sea, or whatever they do with it. And so that intellectual property theft, as well as their ability to turn things on and off, really dangerous. So you think that as long as we have power, you're going to have your internet? That is not the war plan fighting for the future. They're looking at, you're not going to have the internet for months, maybe ever get back. And you'll have to go to some new digital plan to talk to Americans from place to place. If we're in a full-scale conflict, that stuff goes away. They have abilities to take out our GPS systems. And we're building countermeasures. But you just have to think about where they're going and what that means and why we need to understand it. I mean, I always used to joke that the greatest threat was the fact that they have anti-missile technology, meaning they take out our GPS systems. and you have millions of Americans who are hitting their Starbucks app, can't find it. Uncaffeinated Americans by 8 o'clock is a super dangerous thing, I think. Oh, come on, lighten up, Professor. And by the way, I just have to say that if I can say one thing, I had a great dinner at the President's house, and the First Lady, magnificent hosts for sure, but I got to sit with your professors for a while and have a chat. I've never heard professors brag about their students the way these guys did. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know if there's checks involved or a little cash, or you guys are buying them an apple or something. Unbelievable. You guys must be amazing. Because they went on for, I don't know, how long was it? 45 minutes or something? Yeah, that was unbelievable. Well done. Whatever you're doing, you have got them inspired for what they do. I think you should be congratulated for that. Coming off of COVID, not an easy thing to do. So congratulations.
You've got a powerful message, and one that needs to be heard all over this country. Thank you for being with us here tonight at Wofford College.
Thank you for having me, everybody.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.